All right. Hi, all. Warm welcome to the session. My name is Mika. I'm the CEO at Slush. And most likely, many of you know, Slush is known for its annual event in Helsinki and the global events happening all around the world. But due to the fact of global pandemic, we couldn't pull those off this year. But instead, what we did is Note by Slush, which is a created community for founders, investors, and some selected ecosystem builders. And I think the key insight that we had was that the true value lies in these yet fairly intimate sessions that we're going to do over the course of the fall. And today is not exception. Today we're joined by a person who I personally admire highly. Jan Hammer is the general partner of Index Ventures, and he's also the top ranking venture capitalist according to the Midas List Europe 2019. That's pretty exciting. In this session, Jan will share his learnings of hundreds of startups, including 33 unicorns who have expanded across the Atlantic. But this session is also the official launch of Index's in-depth study of expanding your company overseas, which was actually published today morning. And it's based on some of the most extensive analysis of European founders ever done on this topic. And that's extremely exciting. And Jan will talk about exactly that. Before we jump to the session and I hand the mic to Jan, couple practicalities for this session. So we're running a bit tight with the time, and let's give all the time we have for Jan to provide the insights. But you have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat, and there will be Index team also following the chat and responding to some of the questions. And if there are questions that are not possible to be answered in this session, we're going to make sure that we will provide you an answer for those. And secondly, we're going to end the session with a couple rapid fire questions from my side to kind of like wrap it up all the insights that we have had and end on a positive note. But I think it's time to hand the mic to our special guest, general partner, I think, Index Ventures, Jan Hammer. Welcome to the Slush Node sessions, and great to see you.
Thank you, and hi, everyone. Thank you, Mika, and thank you, everybody at Slush, for bringing us back together and innovating again in the face of the COVID pandemic, bringing us together through your Slush Node. One of the most daunting tasks that entrepreneurs that we've encountered have been faced with is overseas expansion. And one of the key markets historically has been the US. Over the years, we've worked with many European founders, and they have shared one common goal: to conquer the biggest tech market and make it big in America. There's a lot of challenges along the way: different time zone, relocation, cultural differences, a hyper-competitive market, and generally, it's just not easy. And which is why I'm excited to share that today we're launching the most extensive research on this topic and publishing all our findings in one comprehensive guide and making it widely available. It's a story of over 300 startups spanning 25 years of experience and founder stories. Over 30 of these have become unicorns, and a dozen of them have IPO'd in the US. It's a pretty remarkable data set. No presentation can really start without a logo slide, and this one is no different. It's become clear that European companies have been creating more and more winners that make it big in the US. And moreover, given the current trend, Europe is on a fantastic trajectory to create even more successful transatlantic companies. And these companies are succeeding because they have access to capital, to talent, and networks of experienced operators. It's really history of a decade or two ago when operators were technical, founders were technical engineers, and they had to move to Sand Hill Road to go and ask for capital, looking for business partners to help them launch their company. Today, founders out of Europe have access to European venture investors, to US investors, as well as global capital that's flowing in. Remarkably, there are more engineers in Europe than there are in the whole of the US. And importantly, given recent trends, there are role models. There are successful companies that have accomplished this goal. A couple of them, like IGN and Spotify, have crossed the $50 billion mark in terms of market cap. And these have spawned networks of further entrepreneurs, serial founders, mentors, angels, and co-investors, which can all help scale the next generation of European companies. And this has given founders a lot more flexibility how to approach US expansion. Historically, the capital came first, but no longer do we see today companies uprooting themselves and moving everybody in one go into America to become purely US companies. And no longer do they need to seek technical talent in the US, and not to mention the cost and availability and retention of engineers that we see in Silicon Valley. So the trend we see today is that US remains a key market. To make it globally is sort of synonymous with first making it big in the United States. But a large part of your company can stay back in Europe. And really, it's about conquering the US market. So we've often found that founders get conflicting advice. And this advice is often inconsistent, but it's not wrong. And it's because there was there were set templates in the past. And one thought that you had to follow some of these set templates, which is no longer true. And what our research based on this empirical data of over 300 companies reveals, that there are really archetypes, role models of companies that we've clustered here into 4 groups that really outline 4 successful possible strategies how to enter the US market. And this is a big change from a decade ago. So let's go through these in turn. The first one we call Compass. This is really the one that we call built in Europe, sold in the US. The strategies are really driven by TAM and addressable revenue dollars that the relevant startup would go after. In the case of Compass, these are companies that have more than 50% of the addressable market in the US. The US is really the true north. It won't surprise anybody that many of these companies are enterprise software companies, just like the logos shown on this slide. Given that US is so important, no wonder that typically one founder moves across and immediately starts hiring a go-to-market expansion team on the ground. But importantly, the difference between now and 10, 15 years ago is that the technical talent and R&D can remain back in Europe. Anchor is the second archetype for expansion. For anchor companies, US is important, but typically represents between 15 and 30% of addressable revenue. There are other markets that are equally important, whether that's Asia, Latin America, or Australia. Very often, these companies fall into categories of commerce or fintech. And these companies are really focused on getting the first go-to-market hire on the ground, a local GM, local president, local head of sales, and then creating an autonomous organization in the US. IGN is a perfect example of this archetype. Having hired a strong local president for North America, building a local go-to-market organization supported by the headquarters from Amsterdam, and then winning key clients on US soil, but continuing to expand across the globe, not just in the US. The third archetype we call Telescope. These companies are driven by distribution models allowed by the App Store, such as gaming companies, or a high velocity bottoms-up sales motion. So very often these would be prosumer or sort of cloud download type software companies. For these companies, the founder doesn't immediately need to move, we have found that typically what you want is really conquer that distribution, and the management team or part of the team can move subsequently. And the last and the fourth archetype for expansion is pendulum. This is where gravity shifts, not just on day one, but over time between the European original headquarters and the US. Quite often, these companies have two co-founders or split co-founders between the two locations. US often represents between a quarter and half of the addressable market, but there is no particular reason or one single reason why the company ought to move or not move. And interestingly, Index, our own firm, has kind of followed this pendulum model where our resources and people are roughly equally spread between London and San Francisco. So with that, we're launching the app today, together with a handbook and resources that will help you determine which archetype to follow. And from the archetype, one can derive a number of key questions as to how to accomplish this transition to the US. So on a practical note, the first and probably one of the toughest questions that a startup will ever face is when to move. If you expand too soon, you may spread yourself too thin. And if you expand too late, you may be giving the market to a competitor. But in any case, once you decide, you have to commit. Second practical question could include a location choice. The empirical research in the handbook shows that New York is increasingly the destination of choice, not just because it's halfway between Europe and Silicon Valley. The time zone clearly plays a large role, but also given the new pools of tech talent and better retention dynamics than those in Silicon Valley, have made New York a pretty attractive landing place. The third dimension is who moves, who should go. 10 years ago, it'd be the founder of founders, and it would be a one-off big move. Now, and depending on the archetype, it's far more nuanced who should move and when. But it is, in any case, pretty essential to hire a great go-to-market team, your sort of first commercial hire who can also be a general manager and help grow the local presence, and to build some sort of an autonomous organization that can then continue growing in the US. There are so many other questions. The how-to list is endless in terms of tax, stock options, all sorts of technical questions. And the one reason really cited as an obstacle in the research has been culture, maintaining culture, cohesion, and communication between teams, being cited as one of the most critical factors of successfully landing in the US. But the resources really cover, and the case studies that you will see in the handbook, cover all these different cases. And sadly, the impact of COVID has obviously overshadowed a lot of these plans. And we know many entrepreneurs, whether from our own portfolio or from further afield, who had to postpone their plans. And of course, this chapter is far from over. So this marks the end of the presentation. Thank you again to Slush for allowing us to present this, and happy to take some of the questions with Mika. Thank you again, and we're here to support you through many important decisions that you have around your move to the US.
Thank you so much, Jan. I'm amazingly impressed of the in-depth of the study. I had a chance to actually check it through in the morning. Kudos to you and the whole Index team. Maybe a couple questions to wrap the session. So the first one is kind of like, you obviously discuss with hundreds of founders every single year, and you have done it for many years. So kind of like the first question to you related to this topic is how do you feel that how the conversations that you have had with founders have changed, let's say, in the past 10 or 20 years, related to the topic of expanding overseas or expanding to the other markets?
Mika, thank you. That's an excellent question. I have seen this conversation evolve, and evolve dramatically probably the biggest driver in tech that we've seen has been platform shifts. And we did mention the App Store, we did mention the cloud. Obviously, the consequence of those platform shifts has been the sort of the flattening of the borders and the whole globe being an addressable market potentially. And again, US maintains that predominant position. So the importance of making it big in the US hasn't changed. The ambition has grown because it's become within easier reach. And as I mentioned in the presentation, the approach, therefore, how to land there has become far more nuanced. You no longer have to uproot the whole company, sort of get on a ship and move the whole business in order to potentially even sacrifice the achievements in the home market. What we increasingly seeing as a trend is building on the strength of the engineering base, on the technical talent that Europe has cultivated, but viewing US as an opportunity to which today's entrepreneurs look with great ambition.
Right, that's really good. But kind of like continuing from there, as you mentioned in the presentation, there is a lot, many different ways, kind of like now how to expand to the US, and there are obviously things to consider a lot. But there are a lot of founders listening this presentation and also in YouTube, and also people will read your study. But kind of like going more practical level, taking all of these things account, what do you say is the key thing to remember when expanding to the US, as of if you are like a founder of a company or operator in a company?
The key thing has remained the same, and it all revolves around leadership. And at the end of the day, all startups, when they go more distributed and expand globally, obviously there's going to be an inherent trust between co-founders, between employees, communication between offices, and of course, modern technologies, whether that's not just being on email, but being on Slack and other systems, has collapsed the borders somewhat. But there will be that continued emphasis on just having the right leader, somebody who can not only plant the flag, but also expand that presence, attract great talent, and kind of almost replicate what that successful business might have done in the home market. So while the environment has changed, that importance on having great leadership in your destination market, that's unchanged. And I believe that will continue to be the case.
Got it. That's a great answer. Before we head to the final question, at this point, I want to say to all the people who are listening, you can still ask questions in the chat. There is Index team responding to them. And if we're not unable to respond to them now, we're going to ensure that we can deliver the answer to you. Then, Jan, the final question, kind of like to end this also like the futuristic and optimistic tone of voice. Thinking all about this, like doing the study, and you're an investor in multiple leading companies in Europe, kind of like what's your thinking of how the European startup ecosystem and tech ecosystem will look like in 2030? Are you optimistic of the next 10 years, what we have in store?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I'm a huge believer in the resolve and strength of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Europe. I'd say Europe may be behind in terms of the count of businesses or the rate of creation of startups, but arguably the trajectory on which it's moving is far faster than the US market. The reasons are well documented, and again, back to technology that's become widely available, and sort of access to the same app store and the cloud and the basic tools upon which you can build your company. So that's sort of given fuel to European entrepreneurs, and coupled with what we call the networks, the role models. All the ingredients are there, and with the ingredients, the ambition has grown. I guess to kind of take just one more step back, it sort of really levels the playing field. And yes, historically, Europe, and perhaps specifically UK, because of the language, has been the landing port of US companies expanding eastwards. And naturally, what we've discussed here, US has been the destination, or the first destination, because of the addressable market size. for startups expanding overseas from Europe. But I think it would be pretty narrow-minded to talk about just Europe and US. There are other continents, growing populations, and in those other corners of the world, technology is adopted equally fast, if not faster. So where I'm optimistic is, and I see this with many companies I work with, entrepreneurs are shooting for the stars, and many companies that we see that are being built today are being built global and with a global ambition from day one, not just to make it in the US.
Got it. Got it. Okay, I already said that it was a final question, but is there something you want to say to kind of like end the session, or for all the founders listening to this, and also the European founders and also people from the other markets who are actually in the early days of their venture and building the companies to become like a global superstar? Is there anything like you want to share, or kind of like wrap up from this session?
Sure. I guess the recurring theme to what we've been discussing here, Mika, is ambition. We are, of course, living in some extraordinary times, both good and bad. And obviously, there's a lot of pain inflicted on the world through the recent pandemic. But the one thing that sort of has continued, if not continued the same, but continued accelerating, is the pace of growth of technology. And I guess, so I would end up with sort of what I would share with the entrepreneurs, that the opportunities are there, and technology can make a meaningful difference for good, for sure. And actually the circumstances are such that you can sort of fulfill your ambition and really shoot for the stars from day one. So cheers to ambition.
Cheers to ambition, indeed. That's, I think, a fantastic way to end the session. Massive thanks, Jan, for joining us today, and also kudos to the whole Index team for putting amazing research piece together and coming today to join the session with us. Thank you so much for that.
Really enjoyed it, Mika. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody at Slush.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow we're gonna have like a bunch of sessions also coming up. There's one special speaker who have also expanded their company to the overseas, which is Spotify. So Daniel Ek will be speaking tomorrow. But also we're gonna have an after party coming up tomorrow evening. There are gonna be some surprise acts, so it will be starting at 8 p.m. Eastern European time. At this point, once again, huge thanks for joining us. Huge thanks for Index team, and thanks for on behalf of the whole Slush team, and stay tuned for all of the other sessions we have coming up. See you.